Keddie, California, a town that hosted a population of less than 100 people, would be absolutely devastated in the spring of 1981 when the brutal murders of 3 individuals and the abduction of a 4th would occur at Keddie Resort Cabin number 28. Because on April 12th, 1981, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp, who was returning home in the morning after spending the night at a neighbor's house, walked in the front door of the small cabin her family had been renting and was met with the bound, bloodied, and deceased bodies of her mother, her brother, and her brother's friend. Now, not only was there a brutal triple homicide to deal with in the living room, but Sheila and her neighbors would also soon learn an even more horrifying bit of information: that her only sister Tina was missing. The violent murders and the abduction of Tina Sharp would set off a confusing and suspicious investigation that is still ongoing to this day. Officially being dubbed the Keddie Cabin Murders, the truth of what happened to the Sharp family all those years ago is something that continues to frustrate and elude police. So please, join me today while we take a look at one of Northern California's most infamous and unsolved murders, and the one that put the once unknown and small town of Keddie onto everyone's radars. I'm your host, Andy, and this is Strange and Unexplained. In 1979, Susan, or Sue Sharp, would relocate herself and her 5 children from Connecticut to Northern California after separating from her husband. The family originally rented a small trailer when they first moved to the area, but after a year of being cramped together, the Sharps were able to relocate once again to cabin number 28 at the Keddie Resort in Keddie, California. This small town, and even smaller community, would be where Sue and her 5 children would reside until the horrific events in 1981. Those children included her 15-year-old son, John, daughters Sheila, age 14, and Tina, age 12, and her 2 younger sons, Rick and Greg, who were 10 and 5. Now, the Keddie Resort was a cozy vacation spot nestled deep in the Sierra Nevada. The resort featured a variety of small cabins, a main office, and a convenience store, in addition to a playground and a refreshing pool for guests to enjoy. The cabins were typically rented out on a weekly basis. They boasted a rustic charm with no electricity or running water. Now, despite their simplicity, the resort attracted many families seeking a retreat from urban life and a chance to bask in the natural splendor of the mountains. And even though the cabins were small and considered a rustic getaway, the Sharps, as well as several other families, made these little vacation spots their homes. And just like with any other small neighborhood or community, the children around the area were friends with one another, and they would often have sleepovers together. This is what was happening the night of April 11th, 1981, when Sheila Sharp headed over to one of their neighbors' cabins, the Seabolts, at around 8 p.m. Her sister Tina had already been over there hanging out when she arrived, and after watching a little TV and chatting together, Tina headed back home for bed. It would be the following morning, at around 7 a.m., when Sheila would return home to make the horrifying discovery that I alluded to earlier in the episode. Inside the living room of Cabin 28 lay the bodies of Sue, John, and John's 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate. Each one had been bound with a different form of electrical wiring and had been brutally attacked with at least 2 knives and a claw hammer. The living room of the home was covered in blood, and the teenager was left terrified. After frantically running back to the Seabolds to get help, Jamie Seabold rushed back to the house to check and see if any other members of the Sharp family were all right. He made his way to one of the adjacent bedrooms and was overwhelmed briefly with a sense of relief when he found the 2 younger Sharp boys still asleep in their beds, along with one of the boys' friends and fellow neighbor Justin Smart. But more on Justin a bit later. Now, not wanting to traumatize the boys anymore by having them see the scene in the living room, Jamie was able to get them out of the bedroom of the window and safely back over to his house, where his wife had already phoned the police. Jamie later confessed, however, that he did return back to the house and enter through the back door as he tried to once again locate Sue's other daughter, Tina, but alas, she was nowhere to be found. Now, when police arrived, they were able to document just how brutal the attack on the family really was, with John and Sue having their throats slit and suffering multiple stab wounds, and both having repeated strikes of blunt force trauma, mostly from the hammer, and the same could be said for Dana Wingate. But most importantly, where was Tina? With the FBI called to the scene, an all-out search was instigated for Tina. So with the police having no one else to turn to, they looked to the only surviving witnesses, the boys. During the initial investigation, all three boys maintained that they were asleep during the attack. However, Justin Smart, the neighborhood friend who was staying the night, later disclosed to investigators that he did witness Sue with two men in the house that evening. One of the men was described as having a mustache with long hair, and the other was noted to be clean-shaven with short hair, but both of them were wearing glasses. One of the men, he said, was seen carrying a hammer. He would go on to tell investigators that John and Dana came home, and the pair started getting into an argument with the two men that progressed to what he referred to as a violent fight. After which he says that the men took Tina out of the house through the back door. A composite sketch would then be drawn up of the two men and sent around locally. However, these sketches have since become a topic of concern amongst people who were suspicious of the case. That being because these sketches were never done by an actual police sketch artist or FBI artist. In fact, they were done by a local man that sometimes helped out with cases, and apparently this man had no artistic ability, according to reports. I guess it really is all about who you know. But anyways, the sheriff at the time, Doug Thomas, and the special agents who were sent to assist in the investigation got to work trying to find any possible clues as to who could or would have done something like this. The primary suspects in the case were quickly identified as Justin's father, Martin Smart, and a house guest they had named John Bo Bobedy, who had ties to organized crime in the area. According to reports, both men had been observed acting suspiciously in a bar that night, and both had been seen wearing suits and ties. Martin Smart would also go on to tell the investigators that he had possessed a hammer that was coincidentally very similar to the one found at the scene that he said had mysteriously disappeared shortly before the murders. That's great, Martin, but nobody else mentioned a hammer, but we'll be sure to write that down. Now, even though they did have suspects at the time, they unfortunately did not have any evidence tying the men to the crime, and the case would eventually go cold. Now, there was still a large-scale search that went on for Tina around the surrounding area for several weeks, but after no results, the search would be called back and she would go on to be listed as just another missing persons. That is until 1984, because 3 years later, in Butte County, approximately 30 miles from Keddie, a hiker would stumble upon the discovery of a human skull. And alongside those remains, detectives were able to uncover a child's blanket, a blue nylon jacket, a pair of jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty container of surgical tape. And that tape dispenser is significant, by the way, because something I failed to mention was that the victims at the Keddie cabin murders all had their mouths taped shut with surgical tape. Following the discovery of the remains, police would go on to confirm that they were in fact Tina Sharp. This would now confirm that the Keddie cabin murders was a quadruple homicide. It's here that another bit of pretty important information comes into the picture. Following the initial discovery of the remains, the Butte County Sheriff's Department would receive an anonymous phone call where the caller indicated that the skull probably belonged to Tina Smart. Unfortunately, and for seemingly unknown reasons, this conversation was recorded on a small tape, but was then placed into a manila envelope and then tossed into an evidence bin without ever being followed up on. Surprisingly, the tape that contained the anonymous tip about Tina was discovered intact in case records, untouched by the Plumas County Sheriff's Department until 2013, when the case was reopened under the new supervision of investigator Sheriff Greg Hagwood and Special Investigator Mike Gamberg. The new investigation quickly began turning over any old leads and reopening any and all evidence files associated with the now 30-year-old case, and they soon started noticing multiple red flags during their searches. It was revealed that Marilyn Smart, Martin's wife and mother of Justin, had separated from her husband Marty the day the murders were discovered, finding that she had even handed over a handwritten letter from her estranged husband to the Plumas County Sheriff's Department. In the letter, Marty would express his frustrations with Marilyn, and he stated, "I've paid dearly for your affections. Now I've paid with the lives of 4 individuals. You inform me that our relationship is over? Fine. What more do you expect from me? The letter in question, however, was not considered a confession and was not investigated further at the time. Now, despite Marilyn's disclosure in a 2008 documentary that implicated her husband's friend, Bo, Sheriff Doug Thomas contested that this claim and affirmed that Martin had passed a polygraph test when he was investigated. It was later, however, revealed that Martin may have had a close relationship with Sheriff Doug Thomas, although Thomas still denies this claim. In 2016, Mike Gamberg, who went to visit with a counselor at the Reno Veterans Administration, stated that the counselor told him that he met with Martin Smart in 1981, and Martin reportedly admitted to killing Sue and Tina during their session. The counselor would state that Martin confessed, "I killed the woman and her daughter, but I didn't have anything to do with the boys," which does make sense. Now, despite being informed of this confession in 1981, the Department of Justice disregarded it as hearsay. Now, let's get into some of the theories to what really went down that night and why. One prominent theory suggests a romantic love triangle between Martin, Marilyn, and Sue. Allegations surfaced that Martin and Sue were having a romantic affair together, with Sue allegedly counseling Martin's wife Marilyn to leave her reportedly abusive husband. Now, upon learning of what he considered meddling in his marriage, Martin sought the help of Bo, a friend and reported mob enforcer who had stayed with the Smart family just before the murders. He asked him to remove Sue from the equation. This could explain Marilyn's decision to leave her husband the day the murders were discovered, as well as why the Smart boy and the other 2 Sharp boys in the adjacent room were not harmed. Furthermore, it provides some insight to the significance of Martin's handwritten note that Marilyn handed over to the Plumas County Sheriff's Department all those years ago. Several investigators assigned to the reopened case since 2013 believe that the murders are connected to a larger conspiracy. According to Gamberg, it's evident that the Department of Justice and Sheriff's Department under Thomas's leadership attempted to conceal the truth. He contends that Bo and Martin were involved in a broader drug smuggling operation that implicated the federal government. This may also provide an explanation for the Sacramento DOJ's choice to assign 2 reportedly corrupt organized crime special agents instead of officers from the homicide department to assist with the investigation. Also, this possibly sheds light on Sheriff Thomas's decision to let the 2 primary suspects leave town without any consequence. Now, over 40 years later, the case continues to haunt the small town of Keddie, as well as the officers who were still attached to it. Despite Martin Smart passing away from cancer in 2000 and Bo Bobadee dying in Chicago in 1988, the investigators still looking at the case believe that these 2 men might not have been the only ones involved. With new evidence being found as recently as 2018, hopes that at least some sense of closure might be brought to the surviving members of the Sharp family, as well as that of Dana Wingate, who have continued to pressure law enforcement for answers since the loss of their loved ones back in 1981. But there you have it, folks. The case of the Keddie cabin murders. The brutal quadruple homicide that absolutely shocked the tiny town of Keddie that's been hidden away in the Sierra Nevada. One that to this day still holds more questions than it does answers. Was there a cover-up, or was this just a simple case of extremely questionable police work? At this point, it's still not clear enough to tell, but hopefully sometime soon we will finally know who was truly responsible for this crime. We hope you've enjoyed this episode, and if you have, please like and subscribe and follow us for more content just like this. Don't forget to follow us on social media, everywhere at True Crime Guys, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for videos and shorts posted daily. Thank you for joining us today here at Strange and Unexplained, and we hope to see you again next time. But until then, be strange, but don't be a stranger. Bye.